Great mighty God, you are my source of life. Great mighty God, you are my source of life. When I am weak.
This is Mark Knatzer from Plain Speaking Ministries. We are making the Word of God easy to understand and the relationship with Him simple. This will be my book called Effortless. I wrote a book about a year ago, posted it on Amazon, and decided to take a look and see how it was doing, and noticed that it was not doing well at all. I put it out for free to download the book for free from Amazon Kindle, and no one saw it. So I realized that, when you offer something for free and absolutely no one takes it, that means it's probably not being seen. So suppression of the Christian message is alive and well in America. And so I began to post it here on WordPress in a blog form, and then from there to this podcast. But when I began to copy the chapters into the blog posts, I thought to myself, it's not bad, but I can do a lot better now. I really feel I can. So I began to write it over in the blog post. And what I'm going to do for you today in the podcast here is to read you my new book, My Book Called Effortless. This is chapter 1. Open your eyes. I always like a story when there's an unspoken history behind what you're reading. Things alluded to in passing by the characters that you have to infer for yourself. It adds mystery, but I like it mostly because it's the way life is. When you tell a story, you start somewhere in the middle of a larger story. This is no exception. I could go back and talk about how I got saved, how I came to Jesus after falling apart, but what I'm going to do instead is focus on a life lesson He taught me. How to know Him. It's sort of a culmination of the walk of learning on which He has led me. I'm going to make you comfortable knowing God. It's going to be quite easy when we're done. That's because He wants to be known by you. By the way, I'm adding a couple of things here in the podcast that might not be in the book. That last sentence is an example. We all know Him. Jesus is available to know, but there's knowing Him as we go. It's the active knowing as we walk through life that continually teaches us, keeps us, helps us grow. Just meeting Him once when you pray to receive Him, well, that's good, but it shouldn't stop there. You should keep knowing Him. Knowing Him as you go is the only way this Christian life is going to mean anything to you. Otherwise, after a while, it's just like you've never been saved. You might be going to heaven when you die because Jesus has forgiven you your sins, but you don't feel any different now unless you keep knowing Him. It sounds almost like a work, and it could very easily be. I mean a work in the sense that the Bible talks about it, and that we're not saved by works, but by faith. Knowing Jesus could easily be interpreted and understood as a kind of work you must do to earn God's help in your life. The sad thing is, if you interpret it that way, it very well could be a work to you. You could look at knowing Jesus as your duty and think if you don't do it, then you can't very well expect Jesus to help you. See, anything can be made into a law, a work, or a law of works. What I'm advocating is a different relationship to God, one that doesn't depend on your doing anything to earn God's good graces. Knowing Him like this is just like opening your eyes. You know why that is? It's because God is there. When you open your eyes, you see Him. When you reach out your hand, you touch Him. When you speak to Him, He hears you. And when you talk to Him, He answers. This different relationship is dependent on God being there, just like that. Sadly, many of us don't believe that. Well, my friends, that's the issue. Truly, I tell you, if you believe God is there, as truly and completely as if He were a physical person, that will be your experience. No, he's not a physical person. He doesn't have a physical body. We know that clearly from the Bible. He that worships God must worship him in spirit and truth, from John chapter 4. God is a spirit, but contrary to popular belief, you can feel him. You can see him, feel him, and know him. You see, feel, and know him spiritually. It's not spooky, weird spiritual we're talking about. The problem with our understanding of it is that folks have vilified the idea of God being real and knowable. They do that because they can't stand God. They don't want to face him. They don't want to admit he's real. They want some arm's length relationship with him where all they have to do is follow some list of rules and don't have to actually talk to him. God doesn't want that. That's what the law was, and that's not his best. No, God can be seen, felt, and heard, but not with physical eyes, ears, and skin. Although he can. That's not what I'm talking about here, though. He certainly can manifest that way. What I'm talking about, though, is the way God is meant to be felt or experienced or known by every believer all the time, spiritually. Continually in your life, God is meant to be known this way. You should walk with him in the cool of the day, like Adam. Life should be like the Garden of Eden with God. In faith, you can have that. And I feel like I should address that just a moment. Because yes, it says that we go through tribulations, trials. It says in the Bible that we must go through things. But the truth is that most of the things we go through are our own doing. A life lived in faith with God can be like walking in the Garden of Eden. I mean, it should be that kind of going through things that we're doing. Like, for example, Adam had work to do in the garden. Adam was supposed to name all the animals and all the plants. He was supposed to tend and keep the garden. That's doing stuff. But that's just pleasant stuff, things like that. That's what you're intended to do. That's what your life is meant to be like. Okay, now I'm going to go back to reading. God can be known spiritually and not an iffy kind of feeling, but real and tangible and not to be doubted. Now, how is it done? That's what I'm trying to get to here with as little preamble as possible, but I feel I have to set the stage with this simple understanding that our experience with God is not physical, but spiritual, because God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. This is the part that needs understanding. Just because he's a spirit doesn't mean he can't be felt. You just feel him spiritually, with spiritual senses. You are meant to do that, folks. There are no shortcuts. This is the part where people want to turn to the law and follow him in a way they can understand. That's just not the way it's meant to be. It's not the best. Don't be discouraged now. It's not hard. It's not hard at all. It's one of those misconceptions that have kept people from doing it. I'm here to tell you folks that most of you have been doing this all along. Maybe you didn't realize it, but those who have any kind of real relationship with God have always done this. They have always known God. That's an active knowing. That's a knowing as you go. It's something you're actually doing. You have to practice for a while, but soon it becomes habit. That's oversimplifying it a little. It's not so much habit as it is that you've gotten your crazy misconceptions out of the way, and now you can just see God the way it was intended, the way it was meant to be before the world and its worldly ways twisted and confused the subject and told you that you had to hide from God. Just like Adam in the garden, hiding after he sinned, just like Old Testament Hebrews, putting a veil across the altar to keep God back there where only the priest could see him, it was never meant to be. And just like Adam hiding in the garden, it's foolish to even think that putting up these barriers really hides you, even if those barriers are just ones of false beliefs inside one's own mind. Believe right, and you will know God. You can't help but know him because he's already there, right now. See him? He's right there. Open your eyes. That's the end of chapter 1. I'm going to go ahead and include chapter 2 in this podcast because it is linked so closely to chapter 1. Really, it's just a continuation of chapter 1. My Book Called Effortless, chapter 2. He will flow. I'm going to give you the answer right away. How do you know God? This is a quotation here. He that believes on me, that was Jesus speaking, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. That's the answer. Here Jesus is describing what happens. You believe and the waters flow. Just get this simple thing and it will be clear. The water is God's Spirit. So you just believe and God's Spirit flows. That's how to know him. That's also knowing him as you go. I say that because often that's where people trip up. They think knowing him is just a one-time thing, or believing him is over once you've said your little salvation prayer. No, the action of salvation is ongoing, and so is the action of believing. The reason that it works, that it truly is salvation, is because he keeps going even if you don't. He keeps saving you continually, even if you don't actively believe. But a revealed, believing relationship with God is one in which you just see him and know him and feel him as you go through your day. Not because you're closing your eyes and praying to him every minute, but because you've already centered yourself in him and you just continue to believe. You could say, continue to experience him as your faith and trust becomes more centered around what he has done and not on what you're doing. I must repeat an invaluable tenet of this faith that my pastor taught me by repeating it over and over again when I first came to church. Here it is. It's not how good you are. It's how good he is. It's not about what you've done. It's about what he's done. Keep that. Keep it safe in your heart. Put your faith in God and he will flow through you and to you. That's how to do it. I will elaborate as fully as I know how in the remainder of this work, but it's never going to be any more complicated than that. That's the simple answer. How do you know God? You believe in him and he will flow. That is the end of chapter 2. I will be continuing the book on the next podcast. This is Mark Canancer with Plain Speaking Ministries. You can look me up on Plain Speaking Ministries in WordPress.com. Also, Plain Speaking Ministries on YouTube. We're there as well. I have a lot of music. Matter of fact, that song you heard at the beginning, it's also in my YouTube channel, and you can go there and listen to any of my music. I have a lot of music. But mostly, we're just here about this subject, and I'm going to let you go, and then I'm going to continue in the next podcast. Hope you enjoyed.